So I remember on eve of World Kidney Day 2020, we have done a small camp that is screening for kidney diseases in a village, Subbaroid Kottur, which is an eye-opener to me because among 104 patients we have evaluated, they were having 80% were having hypertension. Among them, only 40% knew that they were having hypertension and majority of them were not under control. So this is the hypertension which is not monitored properly, and it is an epidemic now. Actually, in our studies, we used to call 12 per 100 population. But in this village, among 104 patients, they were having 80% were having hypertension. So now hypertension is pandemic, and this is more common in chronic kidney disease. And in chronic kidney disease, this hypertension will take form of resistance, because resistant hypertension, it is difficult to control. Now I am going to present two case scenarios I have treated. One is a 37-year-old medical professional on irregular medical treatment for hypertension, had hypertensive emergency in the form of cerebrovascular accident with left hemiparesis. At that time, his BP was 220 by 140 and he was on 4 drugs but not under control. And after 2.5 months after this event, he approached me, and I will give the detail of this case afterward at the end of my talk. Coming to second case, a 17-year-old boy who presented to us with recurrent flash pulmonary edema with blood pressure of 220 by 180. He was started in multiple antihypertensives at maximum dosages. Even then, symptoms were subsided, but BP was not under control. And I will also discuss this case at the end of my talk. Coming to outline of my talk, which includes modalities to measure blood pressure, approach to hypertension, definition, burden, and after effects of resistant hypertension, differentiating true resistant hypertension, clinical clues to secondary hypertension, pathophysiology of hypertension in CKD, renovascular hypertension, hypertension in hemodialysis and transplantation, and non-pharmacological and pharmacological therapies and newer modalities in resistant hypertension. Coming to modalities to measure blood pressure, there are 3 modalities. One is office blood pressure, home blood pressure, that is self-recorded blood pressure. Another is ambulatory blood pressure monitoring. The office blood pressure is most commonly measured. Here the hypertension, when we call hypertension, is more than 140 by 90. Here standard precautions are taken for blood pressure measuring. That is more before 30 minutes we should not take any meal or coffee or tea, or we should not exercise, and we should not take any food. Next, before 5 minutes we should take rest. We should sit properly with the feet touching the ground and back touching the chair, back supported, and our arm should be kept on the table, and we should measure the blood pressure. And if that blood pressure, that is the mean of 2 of his blood pressures more than 140/90, we will label him as hypertension. Coming to home blood pressure, that is self-recorded blood pressure, it is simple, easily measured. Thrice a day we'll advise them. We'll ask the patient to buy a digital sphygmomanometer, digital BP apparatus, and ask them to measure thrice a day. And this is important blood pressure which correlates with the outcomes like mortality. Coming to when will you call hypertension is when the blood pressure is more than 140/90 in this self-recorded BP. When the patient is quiet, we call it as hypertension. Next is the ambulatory blood pressure monitoring. It is gold standard, ideal, but it is not available everywhere. Here, the beauty of this measurement is we can diagnose dippers and non-dippers. Who are dippers? When the blood pressure falls at night by 20% from the morning, it is called dipper. Dippers don't have cardiovascular events in major. In non-dippers, majority of them will have cardiovascular events. So when we notice these non-dippers. It is most common in renovascular hypertension and secondary hypertension, and it indicates volume overload also. So all these clues we get from ambulatory blood pressure monitoring, but the ill part of this is it is not available everywhere. And 24-hour blood pressure more than 135/85 in ABPM will label him as hypertensive, and daytime BP more than 140/90 and nighttime BP 125/75 will label him as ABP, hypertension. Coming to general approach to hypertension, before going to resistant hypertension, what should we do to normal hypertension? First is essential hypertension. It is due to polygenic phenomena or low nephron hypothesis or small renal injury hypothesis, and clear-cut reason for essential hypertension won't be there, so we'll call it as primary hypertension, and 90 to 95% will fall in essential hypertension. Coming to secondary hypertension, 5 to 6% of the people will fall in secondary hypertension. Among them, renal tops the list. In the renal, we should know whether it is of parenchymal or vascular. Parenchymal is common. It can be diagnosed by increased creatinine or proteinuria. Actually, usually, physicians sometimes forget to measure the CUE, which is a golden thing to diagnose so many diseases. So a physician should not stop to measure complete urine examination. It will give hints to many diseases. In the hypertension, we'll get the microalbuminuria, proteinuria, because depending on this proteinuria only, we can know the proper treatment and which drugs to be used. When the proteinuria is high, we'll go with the AC inhibitors and ARBs as the initial agent. When proteinuria is low, we can use any of the things like AC inhibitors, calcium channel blockers, or diuretics. Coming to renovascular hypertension, it is also common in CKD because atherosclerotic renovascular disease is the most common renovascular disease in the elderly, which is common in CKD. And another is fibromuscular dysplasia, and in our setup, Takayasu's arteritis is most common cause of renovascular hypertension. Coming to endocrinal, there are so many endocrinal diseases which will cause hypertension, but primary aldosteronism will top the list. In the primary aldosteronism, we'll get the aldosterone and renin ratio. If it is more, we can more than 25, we can diagnose as the primary aldosteronism. Next, hypohyperthyroidism, Cushing's, pheochromocytoma, all these are the causes of endocrinal hypertension. Next, drugs like illicit drugs like cocaine or oral contraceptives, NSAIDs, cyclosporine, calcineurin inhibitors, all these will cause hypertension. Another thing is monogenic diseases or 17-hydroxylase deficiency, like that. And polygenic disorders cause primary hypertension and monogenic diseases cause secondary hypertension. Coming to resistant hypertension. So what is resistant hypertension? Depending upon the number of antihypertensive drugs we use. When will you cause controlled hypertension? When blood pressure is less than 140/90, we will call as controlled hypertension. When it is more than 140/90, it is called uncontrolled hypertension. When the BP is not under control, when we have used more than 3 antihypertensive drugs at the maximally tolerated doses also, then it is called resistant hypertension. If we have used more than 5 antihypertensive drugs, even then if they are not under control, it is called as refractory hypertension. So resistant hypertension and refractory hypertension are number games. Coming to the burden of resistant hypertension in CKD. As the proteinuria increases, this resistant hypertension incidence also increases. In one of the famous trial, when proteinuria is less than 30, it is 8.9%. When it is 30 to 299, that is microalbuminuria is there, that is 15.9%. And when proteinuria is more than 300, it is 22.5%. So as the proteinuria increases, resistant hypertension increases. Coming to CKD, as the stage of the CKD increases and prevalence of resistant hypertension increases. Initially, it is 4%. After that, 30 to 59, GFR 15.8%. And when GFR is less than 30, it is 18.1%. So what are the after effects of resistant hypertension? Why should we worry in the first place? One is, it in the brain, it increases stroke risk. And whenever patient will have stroke, they will have hemiparesis, and sometimes they may die. This is so it increases morbidity and mortality. Coming to heart, it will cause myocardial infarction or heart failure, hypertensive heart failure. Another, coming to kidney, it will cause CKD progression. When the patient is in 2, it will go to 3, 4, and 5, and finally he will go into ESRD. So among 2 lakh individuals of incident hypertension, resistant hypertension is 47% in the patients of CKD, and which results in all these events like cerebrovascular, cardiovascular, and thin kidneys, that is contracted kidneys because of glomerulosclerosis. So all that glitters is not gold. So when do you call resistant hypertension? Not all resistant hypertension is true resistant hypertension. So first we have to evaluate him, whether he is of true resistant hypertension or any underlying things are there. One is pseudo-resistant. When will you call pseudo-resistant? Whenever the person is lack of adherence to drugs or inappropriate measurement technique. When obese individual was measured with a small cough, it will obviously show a hypertension. So these things we should curtail by counseling the patient for adherence, like tuberculosis drugs, how we will give directly observed treatment, like that we should give. And another thing is proper measurement of the blood pressure. Next is the secondary hypertension. I will deal with the secondary hypertension later. There were many causes of secondary hypertension. We can get clues with the proper examination of the patient with simple diagnostic methods. Then we can treat the secondary causes. Then this resistant hypertension will disappear. And masked hypertension, this is the entity where we need to concentrate. Their office blood pressure will be normal, but home blood pressure is high, more than 140/90. Why it is important? Because it increases the hazard ratio to 2.83. It increases all-cause mortality. Coming to white coat hypertension, here BP at clinic is more than 140/90 and home BP is less than 135/85. And this is also not benign. Usually we'll think that because of sympathetic overactivity after seeing the white coat of the doctor, this will occur. But here also hazard ratio is 1.73. So it is also not benign. They also have increased mortality compared to normal person. And now coming to secondary hypertension, there are so many causes of secondary hypertension. Coming to renal parenchymal hypertension, as actually we have discussed previously, decreased GFR and also proteinuria. Proteinuria is very important because to know the renal parenchymal disease, only creatinine won't sufficient, because at the earlier stages only proteinuria is present. If you treat early, CKD won't progress. Coming to renovascular disease, there are simple clues for renovascular disease like flash pulmonary edema and blood pressure is very high, resistant hypertension, and bruit over the abdomen. And whenever you give antihypertensive drugs like ACE inhibitors and ARBs, it will cause protein. ACE inhibitors and ARBs will cause increase in creatinine because of fall in GFR. And this can be diagnosed by magnetic resonance imaging or CT angiography or invasive angiography. But simple thing is, with Doppler ultrasound also we can diagnose this, but 80% sensitive. Coming to coarctation of aorta, by palpating brachial artery and femoral artery, you can diagnose the coarctation of aorta. Here femoral pulses will be feeble. Next is the primary aldosteronism. The ratio between aldosterone and renin, if it is more than 25, we can diagnose primary aldosteronism. We can diagnose Also 24-hour urinary aldosterone, and the major clue will be hypokalemia and metabolic alkalosis. Coming to Cushing syndrome, we can measure with serum cortisol level in the morning 9 a.m. but truncal obesity, steroid phases will give a hint for Cushing syndrome. Coming to pheochromocytoma, it is indicated by headache, paroxysmal hypertension, palpitations, perspiration, like sympathetic overactivity, and we can diagnose it by plasma metanephrine levels. Coming to obstructive sleep apnea, the patient will have history of snoring and morning tiredness, somnolence, obesity, small neck. It can be diagnosed by polysomnography in sleep studies where apnea hypopnea index is more. Then we can diagnose obstructive sleep apnea with simple palatal surgery. We can treat them. Coming to drug induced hypertension, as already described, these are the drugs which will cause hypertension. Coming to renovascular hypertension, which is also an important cause of secondary hypertension. I will go somewhat detail about this renovascular hypertension. Here, this patient will have recent onset progression of hypertension, resistant hypertension, and flash pulmonary edema, and rise in creatinine with ACEs and ARBs. What are the investigational findings or clues is ultrasound shows asymmetrical kidneys. That is, stenotic side, some contraction of the kidney will be there, and in the Doppler renal artery, the pre-stenotic area PSV is more than 250 centimeter per second, and pre and post stenotic variation will be there, and comparison with the aortic and renal artery PSV ratio, it will be more than 3.5, and post stenotic turbulence and Tardus parvus type, all these things will indicate renovascular stenosis. But to become significant, that is renovascular hypertension to become significant, the 70 to 80% of the lumen of the renal artery should be narrowed. Otherwise, it won't cause hypertension. Next is a CT angiogram, which is now gold standard, and MR angiogram and conventional angiogram. But all of us will go with the CT angiogram and Doppler renal arteries to diagnose renovascular hypertension. Now, I will explain small pathophysiology in renal artery stenosis. This is a 2 kidney, 1 clip hypothesis, that is unilateral renal artery stenosis. Whenever renal artery stenosis is there, it decreases the renal perfusion. It causes increases in renal angiotensin system, that is increased in renin, increase in angiotensin 2, increase in aldosterone. All these cause angiotensin 2 dependent hypertension, because angiotensin 2 increases the sodium retention, and also it causes fluid overload, and it also increases sympathetic activity. Next is as the blood pressure increases, it causes increased renal perfusion in a normal kidney. Then it causes this normal kidney causes sodium excretion, that is pressure natriuresis. As the sodium is excreted, it will cause suppression of renin angiotensin system. So whenever you block the renin, effect of blockade of renin angiotensin system, here it reduces the arterial pressure, enhanced lateralization of diagnostic tests, and glomerular filtration rate in stenotic kidney may fall. So we can diagnose this by captopril renoangiography. Here plasma renin activity is elevated and lateralization of features will be there. Coming to bilateral renal artery stenosis, 2 kidney, 2 clip hypothesis, or one kidney, 1 clip with stenotic of solitary kidney. Here, reduced renal perfusion will be there, and initially angiotensin renin will be increased, but as the normal kidney, that is counterpart of normal kidney, is not there, so increased sodium and water are not excreted, and it will cause increase in blood pressure and volume expansion. They inhibit the renin angiotensin system, so here renin will be low. So here when you prescribe AC inhibitors or ARBs, it will cause further fall in GFR and further AKI. So in bilateral renal artery stenosis, AC inhibitors and ARBs are contraindicated, and in unilateral renal artery stenosis where renin is high, these are advantageous. So this is the pathophysiology behind unilateral and bilateral, where normal kidney will contract in unilateral, but that is absent in bilateral. Coming to medical management of renovascular hypertension, all trials, Astral, Coral, all trials showed medical management is beneficial in renal artery stenosis. So all the drugs which we use for hypertension, we use. The main dictum is whichever is the type of drug, but hypertension should be controlled. It results in decreased after effects. Okay, and coming to surgical management, when we use do surgical management is clear-cut, obvious, severe hypertension, severe renal artery stenosis with normal resistive index. It indicates viability of the stenotic kidney. So at that time, we need to intervene early to save the kidney. So there are two types of procedures. Renal revascularization procedures. One is endovascular procedures where cardiologists do, that is percutaneous transluminal renal angioplasty or balloon dilatation. Both are called endovascular procedures. If it is not possible when the ostium is tight or when the lesion is distal, that time we'll go with the surgical procedures. Here, renal artery reconstruction and extra anatomic procedures. In the renal artery reconstruction, here we require aortic approach, renal endarterectomy, that is atherosclerotic plaque is removed, transaortic resection and reanastomosis, like that. Here, from aorta they will go. And extra anatomic procedures like splenorenal, hepatorenal, here they don't go with the aorta, they do open. So indication for surgical intervention in this renovascular hypertension is it should be resistant and failure to medical therapy, failure to PTRA, and compelling need of and progressive renal insufficiency, and Doppler showing salvageable kidneys, and recent rise in serum creatinine, and evidence of preserved diastolic blood flow, that is low resistive index, and recurrent flash pulmonary edemas. So to save the patient, this surgical intervention can be done. Coming to pathophysiology of hypertension in CKD. So what is the cause of hypertension in CKD? Reduced glomerular mass is the culprit in all causes. So whenever glomerular mass is decreased, it causes increased renin production and endothelial dysfunction. Endothelial dysfunction causes endothelin and vasoactive peptides to rise. They cause smooth muscle contraction, increased peripheral vascular constriction, and increases the diastolic blood pressure. Coming to increased renin production, it causes angiotensin 2 to increase. It will cause sodium reabsorption and water absorption, volume overload, and also it is a vascular smooth muscle constrictor, so increases the peripheral vascular resistance. As the glomerular mass is decreased, sodium excretion is decreased, so sodium retention occurs and increases the volume overload. And as the GFR is decreased, the perirenal sympathetic nerves get activated, causing sympathetic nervous system overactivity. And here is the thing where we use denervation. Perirenal sympathetic nerve denervation. Okay, all these things will cause increased systemic blood pressure, and so they cause resistant hypertension in CKD. So here angiotensin 2 sympathetic activity, endothelin, thromboxane 2, these are all are vasoconstrictor, increases the peripheral resistance. After failure of the kidney, sodium and water excretion is decreased and extracellular volume is increased and causes cardiac output to increase. So all these things are causes of hypertension in CKD. Coming to obesity, it is a pandemic now. Here in the obesity also, similar pathophysiology, except that adiponectin is decreased and Tregs are decreased, and it will cause inflammation and also causes insulin resistant. All these things will cause impaired endothelial relaxation, which results in the hypertension and causes resistant hypertension. It is also a very risk factor, very common risk factor for CKD and also resistant hypertension. Coming to obstructive sleep apnea. This is also here negative intrathoracic pressure causes decreased pulmonary stretch receptor stimulation and increases the chemoreceptor stimulation and macroarousals, hypoxias, hypercapnias. All these things will increase the sympathetic activity and oxidative stress, inflammation, endothelial dysfunction, decreased nitric oxide. All these things cause hypertension, and also these are more commonly having non-dippers at ambulatory blood pressure monitoring, and they will have more serial heart diseases, cerebral diseases, and microalbuminuria. Obesity and obstructive sleep apnea are most common causes of resistant hypertension in our CKD individuals. So in obstructive sleep apnea, aldosterone excess cause sodium and fluid retention, even sodium retention, and increases the parapharyngeal edema and increases the upper airway resistance and cause obstructive sleep apnea. So how to evaluate resistant hypertension? First, confirm resistant hypertension, exclude those pseudo patterns, masked patterns, white coat patterns, secondary hypertensions. Then evaluate for target organ damage. In the ocular, we have to examine fundus. Papilledema is there, grade 3 hypertensive retinopathy or 2 retinopathy, cotton wool spots or microhemorrhages, whether they are present or not. Coming to cardiac, we have to evaluate for left ventricular hypertrophy, left ventricular mass index. Coming to peripheral vascular, ankle brachial index, it indicates peripheral vascular effects of hypertension. Next is the renal. Renal, we need to measure GFR and also proteinuria. Coming to resistant hypertension in hemodialysis population. This is somewhat different rather than normal CKD population. Here, electrolyte changes during dialysis and increase in hematocrit and blood viscosity after ultrafiltration will also increase the sympathetic activity, and removal of antihypertensive medication. All these, in addition to previously mentioned, will cause resistant hypertension in these hemodialysis individuals. Hypertension is present in 80% of the hemodialysis people, and resistant hypertension may be present up to 40% of these hemodialysis patients, and intradialytic hypertension is an indicator of increased mortality in these hemodialysis patients. Coming to how to measure blood pressure in these hemodialysis patients. Whenever you measure pre-dialysis PP, it will show falsely high reading, and post-dialysis PP, it will show falsely low reading. So what we should do is, we have to educate every CKD patient who is undergoing hemodialysis to buy a BP apparatus and to check morning, afternoon, evening in the home. Self-recorded BP, even single value, will help to measure the more cardiovascular events, and they will correlate with the cardiovascular events rather than dialysis blood pressure. Our ambulatory blood pressure measurement, which is ideal and gold standard, helps very much in diagnosing hypertension in these individuals. And this ABPM should be tried after 44 hours of hemodialysis. Next is the office hemodialysis blood pressure. So here what we should do is, median intradialytic blood pressure monitoring should be done. So we have to take recordings during hemodialysis, and the median one we have to take as a blood pressure of this patient, and if it is more than 140/90, we should treat. And here, overzealous treatment for hypertension should not be there, but it should not be also under, because here is the U-shaped curve of mortality. It is relative death rate. Whenever the blood pressure falls below 110, it increases, and whenever blood pressure falls above 180, also death rate increases. So it is an U-shaped curve. So we have to maintain the blood pressure around 140 and 150. It should not be too low or it should not be too high. Here is the reverse epidemiology. Actually, in majority of the studies like SPRINT trial and MDRD, all those things, intense treatment of blood pressure will have good outcomes. But in this hemodialysis population, intense treatment should not be tried, and it should be maintained at 140, because intense treatment may cause mortality. Coming to dry weight. So how will you treat this intradialytic hypertension? Intradialytic hypertension is the major cause of mortality in hemodialysis individuals. So we should use dry weight. So this is the lowest tolerated post-dialysis weight at which there are minimal signs and symptoms of hypovolemia or hypervolemia. This is the dry weight, and if you target this dry weight, we can decrease the majority of resistant hypertension in these hemodialysis individuals. And the treatment is endothelin and nitric oxide, the balance is altered, and carvedilol is a beta blocker, alpha and beta blocker, which has advantage of blocking of endothelin release and which is non-dialyzable. We can use this drug for intradialytic hypertension. First, we should do salt restriction and maintain ideal dry weight. Then these drugs will be helpful. Reduce dialytic sodium. Actually, we usually keep 140 in the dialysate sodium. If we can decrease, then we can decrease the dry weight also. And so hypertension can also be decreased. But the serious thing is they may have muscle cramps if you decrease the dialysate sodium. And these are the drugs which can be used, which are dialysable. So AC inhibitors majority are dialysable, so better to avoid these AC inhibitors. But ARB is non-dialysable, so prescribe ARBs rather than AC inhibitors. But whenever you are prescribing ARBs on hemodialysis patient, please check for hyperkalemia, because hyperkalemia is the most common event we will notice in the CKD on MHD patient. Coming to beta blockers, metoprolol is highly dialysable, so don't go with this. Carvedilol, which is better, which is cheaper, and which has endothelin release blockade, you go with carvedilol. Coming to calcium channel blockers, all are, majority of them are non-dialysable, except the non-dihydropyridine diltiazem, which is dialysable in less than 30%. Coming to anti-adrenergic, that is sympatholytic, clonidine. Clonidine is only 5% is excreted. Actually, after many of the drugs, we'll go with nifedipine, which is short acting, but we'll go with the Nicardia XL, which is long acting. And after that, for any hypertension high, we'll go with the clonidine. But the major drawbacks with this clonidine is whenever withdrawal effect will be there, and it will cause perspiration, palpitations, hypertensive pulmonary edema. So this better to avoid clonidine in majority of cases. If still with all the drugs, if hypertension is not under control, we can go with the clonidine. Coming to vasodilators, hydralazine is non-dialysable and minoxidil is dialysable. So resistant hypertension in transplantation, there are so many factors in will act in kidney transplant. That is donor factors like donor hypertension, atherosclerosis of donor vessel, and renal artery stenosis, anastomotic site stenosis. And if size discrepancy between the donor and recipient, it will cause hypertension. And graft dysfunction will also cause it cause AKI, and it will cause hypertension. And recipient factors like pre-existing hypertension and LVH will also cause hypertension. Outflow obstruction, which causes sympathetic overactivity and also cause hypertension. And the drugs like immunosuppressants, calcineurins, glucocorticoids, cyclosporine, all this cause hypertension in the kidney transplantation. But here also we should maintain the goal. Coming to pharmacological treatment of hypertension, pharmacological and non-pharmacological. Before going to pharmacological, this is non-pharmacological treatment, that is lifestyle medications for prevention and management of hypertension. Here we have to do aerobic exercises 30 minutes every day, importantly 5 days a week, which will decrease the hypertension up to 5 to 8 millimeters of mercury. Coming to diet, here DASH diet, dietary approaches in systemic hypertension. Here we should adopt increased potassium rich food, and we should take decreased salt intake. In here, so sodium restriction makes major thing. Here sodium chloride of 6 grams or sodium of 2.4 grams should be restricted, and the dietary compliance can be diagnosed by 24-hour urinary sodium and potassium. The sodium should be less than 100 millimoles, and 24-hour urine potassium should be more than 100, so that they will cause decrease in blood pressure. And but in CKD people, whenever you are prescribing hyperkalemic diet, you should be careful, because in CIN contrast, interstitial nephropathies, hypokalemia may be there. There, if you prescribe hyperkalemic diet, it will be advantageous. But some chronic glomerular diseases, there they will have hyperkalemia. That time you should prescribe potassium restricted diet. But in other people, the potassium rich diet will decrease the hypertension. And coming to alcohol consumption and smoking, if you restrict these things, BP will come down. And weight reduction, it is very important. For 1 kg weight reduction, 1 millimeters of mercury will be decreased in systolic and diastolic. But don't be over enthusiastic and decrease 10 kilos in 1 month like that. If you can decrease 10% in 6 months, it is beneficial. If you decrease early, it will lead to various complications like hyperuricemia and so many and so forth. So, pharmacological treatment. I don't go in detail about pharmacological treatment, because all of you know where the drugs will act. Initially, first, in resistant hypertension, all the 3 choice drugs like AC inhibitors, diuretics, and calcium channel blockers who have used up to the maximal dosages. So we need to know the other newer drugs which can be helpful for us during treatment of resistant hypertension. And these are the areas where the other drugs will act. In the brain, the sympatholytic drugs like clonidine, moxonidine, alpha-methyl-dopa act, but clonidine have withdrawal effect. Be careful with this. All people, I am saying like orcamine, prescribing like a once a day dose. Don't prescribe like that, because it is a short acting. It should be prescribed like thrice a day or 6 hourly. Otherwise, it will cause withdrawal hypertension, and they may go for hypertensive heart failure. Coming to heart, the drugs causing decreased cardiac output are beta blockers and diuretics, and increased vagal tone are AC inhibitors, ARBs, and direct renin inhibitors. And decreased heart rate, that is negative chronotropic effect, is present in beta blockers and non-dihydropyridine calcium channel blockers like diltiazem and verapamil. Coming to vasorelaxation, that is smooth muscle relaxation, which will decrease the afterload. Here, AC inhibitors, ARBs, renin inhibitors, calcium channel blockers, alpha blockers, thiazide diuretics, and direct vasodilators are hydralazine and minoxidil. And coming to the antihypertensives which acts at the kidney are diuretics and calcium channel blockers and direct renin inhibitors. So chronotherapy. What is chronotherapy? Whenever you prescribe these drugs early in the morning, majority of the times, all physicians will prescribe antihypertensives at the morning, but it is wrong. Please prescribe antihypertensive drugs. Even one of the antihypertensive drugs he is taken, if he takes at the night, it will be beneficial in terms of cardiovascular events, because there are 2 varieties, that is dippers and non-dippers. Dippers have blood pressure, low blood pressure, that is 20% of blood pressure is low during night times, because in the sleep all emotional activity, sympathetic activity, hormonal activity will be decreased, so blood pressure will be decreased. If it is present, their cardiovascular event rate is less. But non-dippers, if the BP fall at night is not present, they are more prone for this cardiovascular events. So to mimic this, if you prescribe one drug at night, if it causes nocturnal blood pressure fall, it will decrease the cardiovascular event. Even one study among 900 individuals of CKD, when they prescribe the antihypertensives at night, the uncontrolled hypertension and resistant hypertension has come down, and even after 3 years, those cardiovascular events were decreased. Coming to resistant hypertension treatment, lifestyle and dietary modification is very important because it will helps in controlling the uncontrolled hypertension, and it helps in preventing the cardiovascular and cerebrovascular events and progression of CKD. Next, add on, and if we label him as resistant hypertension, already we have used completely those 3 drugs. One is ACER, ARBs, and calcium channel blockers and diuretics at maximum extent. Then we have to search which drugs to be taken after those 3 drugs. So first is the beta blocker. Recent times beta blocker has fallen because it won't decrease the cardiovascular events in a small trial, and but it has cardiovascular protection, and CKD people have more cardiovascular events compared to normal individuals. So beta blockers will help in these events decrease in CKD people. So our next choice of drugs will be beta blockers, and before prescribing beta blockers, you should carefully check about pulse rate. If bradycardia is there, don't prescribe. If pulse rate is more than 70, go with the beta blocker. Among these beta blockers also, selective beta blockers are helpful, and among them carvedilol like dual blockers will help. And in hypertensive emergency, labetalol, and preeclampsia, labetalol will help. Next is the aldosterone antagonist. In non-dippers, this aldosterone antagonist like spironolactone will help for control of hypertension. But be careful, because AC inhibitors and aldosterone antagonists in both in toto will cause hyperkalemia. So monitor for hyperkalemia, then only if you can monitor, then only prescribe this spironolactone. Coming to alpha blockers and prazosin, doxazosin. Next drug should be alpha blocker. Next is a central sympatholytic drugs like clonidine, moxonidine, methyl-dopa. But I have already told you, Arcomen will have withdrawal effect, and you should prescribe multiple dosages. It should not be OD or BD dose, because it will cause withdrawal hypertension, which will cause hypertensive heart failure, sometimes death of the patient. Next is the SGLT2 inhibitors, capagliflozin, empagliflozin. That is, these are the drugs recently introduced, and even Credence trial showed which will increase the lifespan of the patient, and all these cardiovascular events are decreased. So they have terminated the trial early because of benefits they have seen with the SGLT2 inhibitors. And even with low GFR also this can be used, and importantly CKD patients with heart failure, these SGLT2 inhibitors will give major benefit. Next is the endothelin antagonist. These endothelin antagonists will, like bosentan and edbisentan, can be used in last resort. So what is the goal of hypertension? All these trials like MDRD, RAIN2, ASK, ACCORD, SPRINT have compared between the normal standard blood pressure like 140 to lower blood pressure less than 120. Among them, they have checked for renoprotection and cardioprotection. The recent trial like SPRINT trial, here it showed major benefits. Even this trial was terminated early because in the intensive arm, they have very much benefits in terms of cardioprotection. But SPRINT had some disadvantage, that in severe intensive group, somewhat of AKI incidence was high than standard group. Apart from that, there is no any disadvantage, and all cardiovascular and cerebrovascular events were decreased in intensifier arm. So everybody And Sprint also have done blood pressure measurement not in office. They have measured at a place nearer to that individuals, and it is done in larger people like 9,000 people. So it is a highly qualified study, and we can depend on this study. So we have to maintain blood pressure of systolic blood pressure of 120 in even in the elderly individuals, not in the dialysis patients. So there are so many newer treatment options when hypertension is not under control with all the above drugs. So they are renal denervation and baroreceptor activation therapy. So what is the sympathetic activity in the kidneys? So this sympathetic activity will cause juxtaglomerular cell to produce renin. So renin secretion rate increases with the beta-1 adenoceptor. In the tubule, it will cause sodium reabsorption, which will also cause hypertension. On the blood vessels, it will cause vasoconstriction with smooth muscle contraction. So if we can target on this sympathetic now, we can decrease the hypertension. Next is here is the renal denervation. What they will do is transluminally they will enter into the renal artery. There they will use three things. One is renal ablation with radio frequency, or they will give ultrasonic waves, or they will inject some neurotoxic substances like alcohol. All these things are given for tunica adventitia, because in the tunica adventitia the perivascular sympathetic nerve plexus is there, and this is targeted by these radio frequency waves, ultrasonic waves, or neurotoxic things. And after 5 to 6 thing, the blood pressure is monitored up to 6 months. There are 3 trials, that is major landmark trials. Simplicity hypertension trial 1. Here it is not randomized. They have done in some cohort, and they showed that it is beneficial even after 6 months, and the blood pressure was decreased in a double digit. Next, they have conducted simplicity hypertension trial 2. Here they have done in 106 members, and it is and all are resistant hypertension patients, but they have observed them for 2 weeks. Later they have enrolled into the trial, and they have randomized the patient. It is a randomized control trial, and this trial have shown benefits with the renal denervation techniques. But simplicity hypertension trial 3, which is recently done, which is also randomized control trial, and the patient population also similar to simplicity hypertension trial 2, but this study shows it is not beneficial. So meta-analysis are another new studies to be done to know the effectiveness of renal denervation. Next is the baroreceptor activation therapy. Here, this is the carotid sinus where baroreceptor plexus will be there. They will give stimulus to the brain, where ventromedial brain, where nucleus tractus solitarius will be there. That is the origin for sympathetic outflow, and these baroreceptor plexus will give inhibitory signals to this nucleus tractus solitarius, thus decreasing the sympathetic outflow. So as the hypertension increases, these baroreceptor reflexes will lose their activation. So what they do is they put a implantable pulse generator, and they keep 2 electrodes into the both the carotids at carotid sinus, and they stimulate the baroreceptors. It is also shown some 2-digit number decrease in the blood pressure. And lastly, coming to my 2 cases, which I have told you earlier. First one is a medical professional with intracerebral hemorrhage, that is who was approached 2.5 months after the event. We have done biopsy, which was showed crescentic chronic IgA nephropathy. If he would have come earlier, he can be treated and he can be normalized. So this is the important, the precious time for referring to a specialist, because if he was checked the renal proteinuria earlier, he would have done biopsy earlier, and that made him helpful in preventing these intravascular intracerebral events. So primary prevention and secondary prevention is very much important in this hypertension pandemic. Coming to second case, which I have described, that is 17-year-old male patient who presented with pulmonary edema, flash pulmonary edema. When we have evaluated him, that he was having 220 by 180 like blood pressure, which was not under control with even with 5 classes of antihypertensives, and on Doppler it was showed bilateral renal artery stenosis, and we have but resistive index was good and recent rise of creatinine was there, but in that patient percutaneous transluminal renal angioplasty could not be done because of tight lesion. So we underwent him for surgical procedure, and in surgical procedure they have done open method because aorta was also damaged in CT angiography. He may be having middle aortic syndrome like Takayasu, and he was done splenorenal shunt, that is splenic artery was anastomosed with the renal artery, so that his hypertension drastically come down after treatment of surgery, and his creatinine was also normalized, and he had polyuric response after the surgery. So it is very important that crucial time, if he would have missed that time, he became chronic kidney disease and he would have succumbed in ESRT. So the time of referral and the time of management is very important in these hypertension. But both of these cases are cause of secondary hypertension. It is not a true resistant hypertension. So take home messages from my talker: home BP readings are far better than office BP readings. Even single home BP reading will help you mostly in diagnosing masked hypertension, and lifestyle and diet modification helps a lot. Even now in the pandemic of corona, hypertensive and diabetic and obese individuals are going for severe corona and severe COVID, and they are mostly succumbed. And resistant hypertension may not be true resistant hypertension. So you have to check adherence is there, correctly measured, any secondary hypertensive causes are there, any clues are there, then only label him as resistant hypertension. And correct approach at correct time may save morbidity and mortality due to cardiovascular events. I think this will help you in approach of chronic hypertensive patients. And thank you JB Chemicals for giving me this opportunity. If any questions are there, I am very happy to answer.
Yeah, madam. Indeed, a great presentation you have given. It was elaborated a lot more about resistant hypertension, and you have given a lot of examples, and you have discussed a lot of trials in your presentation. And definitely that would help our audience doctors in this evening being in this CME. And we have questions, madam. I will just ask the questions and you can answer them. The first question is from Dr. Somappa. Are ARBs contraindicated in renal artery stenosis?
No, sir. In unilateral renal artery stenosis, this is the drug of choice. But in bilateral renal artery stenosis, the ARBs will cause efferent arteriolar dilatation, so that the intraglomerular pressure will fall and decreases the GFR. So it causes AKI, acute kidney injury. So whenever patient is having unilateral, it is the drug of choice. And when it is bilateral, we should not prescribe this.
Yeah, one more question from Dr. Somappa only, ma'am. When should ACE inhibitors be stopped in renal failure?
Sir, ACE inhibitors and ARBs in proteinuria kidney disease, they are very much helpful. They increase the lifespan of the person, but we should monitor carefully the potassium. If it is more than 5.4, it is a danger. 5.5, it is a danger sign. We should de-escalate the ACE inhibitors and ARBs. And another thing is, whenever the patient is volume depleted, you should not give ACE ARB, because they may progress to AKI as GFR further decrease. So whenever the patient is having vomitings or loose motions, you should should ask them to skip the ACRs and ARBs.
Yeah, madam. There is one more question, madam. Very interesting question. How to differentiate whether it's FMD or Takayasu arthritis? I think from recent discussion.
Fibromuscular dysplasia, which is common in US countries, the age group, it is common in younger individuals, and atherosclerotic renovascular disease is common in the elderly individuals, and ARVD is seen at the proximal site, and the fibromuscular dysplasia is at the distal sites. Okay, this can help to differentiate FMD and ARVD.
Yeah, madam. There is another question, madam. What would be the maximum dosage of nifedipine extended release, which is Nicardia XL?
We can go up to 60 mg BD. It is the maximum.
Okay, madam. Is there any age restrictions to use nifedipine? There is one more question.
Nifedipine, it is a short acting. We should not use. Nifedipine will cause sudden fall in hypertension, orthostatic hypotension, all these things. And it is a dihydropyridine calcium channel blocker. But long-acting nifedipine, that is Nicardia retard, Nicardia XL, they are helpful for controlling the hypertension. They are calcium channel blockers, dihydropyridine. They act at the vascular smooth muscle cells and cause acts as a vasodilatation. And even peripheral edema is also less with this Nicardia. And in hypertension in CKD, they are very much helpful for us in controlling hypertension. And first type of drugs, among type of drugs, ACEs and ARBs are first choice. Next, amlodipine and Nicardia retard are the second choice. And whenever ACEs and ARBs are combined with amlodipine, like accomplished trial, will show benefits in lifespan and decreases the cardiovascular events.
Yeah, madam. There we are at the end of the questions. You have answered the questions very well, madam. Thank you very much. Is there any other doctors having any questions? You can raise your hand, or you can post your questions in the chat box. If you want to talk with madam, you can raise your hands also. I will allow you to talk. I think there are all the questions over, madam, and I think I've got a last question. Please explain FMD versus Takayasu arthritis. There is the last question.
FMD is a fibromuscular dysplasia of the arteries, and it is at the renal level only. But Takayasu is a generalized thing, and FMD is present in the US people and Western countries, and Takayasu is present in Asian people. And usually we usually see this Takayasu arteritis. Here, medium sized vessels are involved, and it may also involve the aorta. Multiple vessels can be involved.
Thank you, ma'am. Hope with this we are end of the questions again. Thank you very much for being with us in this wonderful evening and presenting resistant hypertension in a very beautiful way with a lot of examples and lot of trials and all your experience you have shared with us. Thank you very much, and this would definitely will be helpful all the audience doctors. And thank you very much, madam. And thank you very much all the audience doctors for being with us. And from JB Chemicals also, I pray the Almighty to protect all the doctors and medical fraternity, because you doctors are standing in front of the situation in this pandemic situation, and you are protecting the humankind. Great thank you from our side, madam.
Thank you.
Yeah. With this, madam, we will conclude the session with your permission.
Okay.
Thank you, madam. Thank you very much. Thank you all the audience doctors.
Thank you all the audience for spending their valuable time, even though it is not a weekend. On Friday also you have spent, I think you have learned some amount of management of hypertension in CKD. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all.